The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's REMI webinar, Socioeconomic Impacts of a Mixed Housing Development Walter Reed Case Study. This webinar is being presented by Kelly Pinto, Victoria Falcon, Abigail Rosen, and Sean McCarthy, who are all economic interns at REMI. I'm Brian Reel, Marketing and Event Coordinator at REMI, and I'll be hosting this presentation. At REMI, we provide dynamic economic modeling software that policymakers use to inform policy before it is enacted. Our clients work in the fields of economic development, tax, transportation, energy and environment, and more. If you'd like to learn more about REMI, I encourage you to go over to www.remi.com to learn more about each of our individual models, or feel free to reach out to us at info@remi.com, and we'd be happy to meet with you. If at any time during this webinar you have a question, I encourage you to enter that question into the question box. Time permitting, I will moderate these questions to the presenters, and if for some reason we're not able to get to your question, we'll be sure to reach out to you personally through email. I also want to let everyone know that shortly after the presentation concludes, a copy of the slides and a recording will be sent to your email that you used to register. If you have any questions once you have a closer look at all these materials, I also encourage you to reach out to the same email address, the info@remi.com, and I would gladly get you in touch with the appropriate presenter. And that's enough from me for now. Very excited about this webinar. Thank you again to everyone for joining. Thank you to the presenters, and take it away, Victoria.
Great. So glad to be here and present this today. So the socioeconomic impacts of a mixed housing development, Walter Reed case study. So a bit of an introduction and history on Walter Reed. So the Parks, the name of the redevelopment, is located at the former Walter Reed Army Medical Center site, which was opened in 1909 and until 2011 was the primary Army hospital. In 2005, the Base Realignment and Closure Commission recommended that the hospital merged with the nearby Bethesda Naval Medical Center. And in 2017 is when Mayor Bowser broke ground on the parks at Walter Reed, which marked the start of the redevelopment. So the development contains a mixture of office, retail, and housing space, and will offer 2,370 units of housing, of which 465 are designated as affordable housing. This affordable housing is integrated with market rate housing, which was an intentional choice on the developer's part. They will also house 77 veterans who formerly experienced homelessness, along with offering assisted living services. So a little bit of a definition on what exactly affordable housing is. It's typically defined as housing in which the occupant is paying no more than 30% of gross income on housing costs. But affordable housing does include many different programs and practices, such as tenant-based rental assistance, project-based affordable housing, and low-income housing tax credit. So tenant-based rental assistance is a rental subsidy program. Project-based affordable housing, it allows tenants to live in an affordable unit by paying rent based upon their income, doesn't travel with the tenants. Low-income housing tax credit provides a tax incentive to construct or rehabilitate affordable rental housing for low-income households. The necessity for affordable housing. So North Dakota is the only state where a renter working full-time at the federal minimum wage can afford a 2-bedroom apartment without spending more than 30% of their income on housing. There's a national shortage of affordable housing of more than 7 million out of the over 11 million extremely low-income households. The gap between median DC home prices and the median family income seen on that graph shows that this need for affordable housing has been historically present in DC. In 2019, Mayor Bowser set an initiative to create a total of 36,000 new housing units with a goal of 12,000 new affordable housing units. $100 million have been allocated to the Housing Production Trust Fund in every budget since 2015. DC also wants to spread out the affordable housing as an initiative for integration with other market rate housing. So affordable housing at the park. As previously mentioned, there are 2,370 units, total housing units, 465 of which are affordable. 114 are 0 to 30% AMI, 146 are 31 to 50% AMI, 205 are 61 to 80% AMI. So these units are priced to make sure that residents aren't spending a large amount of their income on housing. And in DC, there is a requirement that most new and some renovated residential developments include some affordable homes. So the objective of this study is to find the economic impacts of affordable housing along with furthering the conversation on affordable housing. It's a very complicated topic, so we aim to inform policymakers and developers on how affordable housing units can impact a community. Though affordable housing addresses the needs of lower income quintiles, we want to explore how they impact everybody in the community. It's often debated as a cost issue as well. So we're going to ground this conversation with some predictions. We don't want to take a side on affordable housing, but we do want to provide some of these predictions to be interpreted in whatever way our clients see appropriate.
So yeah, I will begin going over the traditional simulations and some of the results we gained from it. So first, just to start it off, the model we were using is the REMI PI Plus model, which is the premier software solution for conducting dynamic macroeconomic impact analysis of public policy. It offers year-by-year estimates for county, state, and national effects for any sort of policy initiative. You can also see the model linkage on the right. We will also be using the SEI addition to our model. It assesses like the socioeconomic implications of policy. Some of the stuff that it can report are jobs and labor force by race and sex, income by quintile, inflation by income, and jobs by educational attainment. So we will use a couple of these reports in our findings. So traditional economic impact analysis kind of looks at four types of inputs. So first, to sort of model affordable housing, usually rent savings is one of the inputs. So typically you would find the difference in market rate rent and the affordable housing rates and find the kind of the total amount of money that would have spent on market rate rent but was rather spent on affordable housing rent. Also, development costs would be one of the inputs, so the estimated cost for construction over the span of development. So the amount it's cost of the development to be built. Annual revenue, so the revenue gained from the development. This usually comes from rent costs, but there can also be other sort of revenues such as office and retail. And then permanent jobs, so the development will need X amount of jobs to support the residents and the business. These jobs are kind of spread out, so there's some retail jobs, office jobs, nursing care jobs. So to estimate the affordable housing rate difference, we found some of the market multifamily rates for the affordable dwelling units, which are the 0 to 30% AMI rates, and then the inclusionary zone rates, which are the 31 to 50% AMI and the 61 to 80% AMI. So there's a couple of the assumptions that we made. So all of the housing units that we will be finding in the difference in rent and the rent savings are rental properties. We figured it'd be pretty tough to look at purchasing of homes just because a lot of goes into it, like mortgage rates, down payments, other stuff like that. So we just kind of try to make it simple and use rent. And we also found the market rate rents for all four of the residential properties on the parks development. They were all kind of spread out. So there was a mixture of co-living, studio, 1 to 3 bedroom units. So we kind of spread it out equally because we don't really know the distribution. So we thought it'd be best to do it evenly. So the 0 to 30% AMI rates, they don't qualify for the inclusion zone rate. So that we assume that there would be the maximum rate just because the project is pretty new. And we weren't really too sure exactly what the suggested rate would be. And the 31 to 50% AMI rates and the 61 to 80% AMI rates, they are part of the inclusionary zone. So there is a set rate, as you can see, in the minimum and maximum. So we just assumed it would be the 75th percent quartile, just because it's a new development, it might be a little bit more expensive. And we thought we'd didn't want to kind of have too much rent savings in our results because we didn't really want to skew it in a way. So some of the detailed model inputs. So as we talked about, there's the rent savings. So that is a change in consumer price on the rental of tenant-based housing. It comes out to about $7.5 million each year. And we started those inputs in 2028 because that is when we expect the development to be finished. The investment spending, so this is the development costs. So it was on both residential housing and non-residential housing structures, just because there is some office space, there is some retail space, and there also is housing space. So we kind of grouped those two together. It was estimated that the development would cost around $1 billion to build in the span of around 10 years. So it started back in 2018, I believe. So there's still 5 more years left. So we kind of spread it out as at $100 million each year. And then the annual revenue. So this is the revenue that the development makes. We categorize this as industry sales for multifamily residential structures. Once again, starting in 2028, which this was around $37 million per year. And then the permanent jobs on the property. So it estimated that there would be about 1,600 new jobs being added in. These are spread out between management jobs, retail jobs, administrative jobs, and residential care positions. Just because there are some assisted living units in the development, so we kind of just spread it out between the 4 of them. So at some of the results from this traditional simulation, we can see the employment rise in total around 3,000. We considered Maryland and West Virginia in our simulation just because the parks is located very close by Maryland. So we thought we'd take all 3 counties in, or all 3 states. And you can see that DC kind of has the most growth, around 2,000 jobs. But a lot of these jobs are the ones that are on property that are needed to support the development. But you can also see an increase of jobs in both Virginia and in Maryland. So employment by industry. So you can see in 2030, the top 5 industries, same with 2045, same with 2060. Administrative and support services are the top 1 for all 3 years surveyed: retail, trade, construction, and nursing and residential care, along with state and local government. A lot of the jobs that are mentioned, like retail, like nursing, residential care, these are kind of some of the jobs that are on property. So this was somewhat expected. So now we're going to take a look at our new look at affordable housing, something we thought about that kind of differs in a way from the traditional simulation. So our new look at affordable housing is a new look at the methodology used to find the impacts of affordable housing. So the traditional way of looking at affordable housing kind of just looks at the developments as a standard housing unit with a couple of affordable units. Is usually looking at it to see if the investment will have sort of a positive impact on the economy and whether or not it will be profitable. And our new look kind of looks at the mixed-use development kind of outside the costs and the profits of the development, and we possibly might see some new benefits from looking at it from a different way. So we decided to look at the development as a community of people and look at kind of the impact that the people living there bring to the economy, rather than just like the building and the construction costs and all of that. So the impacts that are found can reflect the people living there and what kind of they contribute to the economy, to the labor force, and to other stuff. So our new methodology, so we looked at it as a economic migration of around 5,000 people, just because there's 2,300 housing units. We kind of just considered 5,000 would be kind of a rough estimate. So as you can see in that red graph, that is the net economic migrants. So when you add a migration of 5,000 people, you can see that it grows, but then has a sharp decrease afterwards. So that's kind of to model like people are going to move out because they don't have enough housing, because they can't afford housing, because there's not enough jobs. But since there is affordable housing and these people can afford to live in the housing that Parks offers, they wouldn't really have too much of a reason to kind of move out. So year by year, we adjusted the migration to adjust for this negative net migration. So for example, in this year, 2025, there's a negative net migration of 1,900 people. So we kind of added that back in 2025 just to keep this migration sort of stagnant over time. And now looking after hearing about some of our new methodologies, we decided to look at some of the results now.
All right, so in order to consider the long-term growth of the economy, the local economy, we will assess the incoming human capital, as Sean said, as members of the community and investigate the role in the economy. So we'll pay particular attention to employment, compensation, and investment. Employment is, of course, important, as it will show us how the employment that the migration is bringing into the area affects the health of the labor market. Investigating how compensation rate differs among industry income quintiles will allow us to understand the competition in the region and the demographic makeup of the labor force. And then we'll also look at investment, which is going to allow us to understand that aspect of the region's GDP. So this is a graph of the percent change of labor force and population. The 0% in this graph is the projected growth. So anything above that is what exceeds the projections. Both labor force and population sharply increase from 2023 to 2025 before naturally decreasing once the economy adjusts, which is a result of the new migration becoming a smaller portion of the total DC population as it grows. The most important takeaway from this graph is that the households that are moving to the affordable housing units, they are active members of the workforce, and they're going to be positively contributing towards the health of the economy. So now that we know how the labor force is growing, let's look at more closely at the demographic makeup of the labor force, so we can better understand the labor market in the region. So this is a graph of the percent change of labor force participation rate by race. So this kind of gives some context on the labor force on the previous slide. Overall, the labor force participation increases across all races, which is seen by the light blue all races bar that stays above 0 all the way to 2050. The first demographic that sees a decrease in labor force participation are the other Hispanic category in the year 2033, which includes Asian, Middle Eastern, and Native American residents in the community. And also in 2041 is predicted the Hispanic labor force participation rate will also begin to decrease. So both of these decreases are relatively small, being under 0.001%, but there's still merit in investigating this discrepancy that exists between the group with the highest percent change, which being Black non-Hispanic residents, and the investigating that discrepancy that exists. These two graphs are of employment in thousands of jobs, and then GDP in billions in 2017 dollars. So employment is, of course, increases as we touched before. Many jobs are being created in the area and filled by the incoming residents. And then also in the long term, there's a substantial increase in DC's GDP. So this is the product of many factors, but affordable housing definitely contributes towards it. On the next slide, we investigate just why. So fewer evictions. When households stay in the community for longer, there's more financial security because there's less likelihood of them being evicted. And if they have less incentive to leave. Also, there's increased economic security, which with low income residents who earn as little as 0% of the area median income, they no longer have to struggle to pay for housing, which alleviates some worries when it comes to providing food or healthcare or other essentials. So therefore, without those worries, they therefore become more productive workers. And we also have more disposable income in the local economy. So with the new amount of disposable income they have, they can spend it on local businesses in the DC area, and that also strengthens the local GDP. This is a graph of employment by educational attainment in the area in 2030. So more competition of jobs that require less education will make the job market more competitive. So there's a 25.1% of jobs require a high school diploma or an equivalent, 20.8% require some college but no degree, and then 22.6% require a bachelor's degree. So workers that do not have the qualifications for jobs, workers who do not fit the qualifications for higher education jobs, they are able to find more work because typically so the jobs that low workers who do not have the higher education qualifications are able to find jobs because these and typically these lower paying jobs, these workers will not be able to provide for their families because they do not pay enough to provide for their needs. But as long as they are living in the affordable housing units, this worry is completely alleviated. And then also the workers have more options in the region, so employers will be forced to compete with each other in order to be the most attractive employer, and that competition is healthy and creates more efficiency in the economy.
So this looks at the employment by industry and jobs created over time. And as we can see, in 2030, construction makes up a significant part of these jobs created. And this is kind of a story we see across the board. When you see a original investment in a new project being created, you're constantly going to see more construction jobs, which leads to almost immediate benefits to the economy. However, over time, we see construction become a much smaller part, as the majority of jobs are state and local government, food service, real estate, social assistance, and retail trade. And the thing about this is there's a strong combination of jobs with, let's say, a low barrier to entry, such as food service and retail trade, in comparison to other jobs, such as state and local government and real estate, which can bring in a strong income to these areas. So there's a lot of different alternatives for jobs. And in general, we see that there is an increase in employment because of this project development. And now we're going to look at the compensation rate by industry quintile. And what we see across the board is almost instantly after this project, we see that compensation rate drops. And the reason for this is because we have an increase in population, an increase in labor force, and therefore it's less competitive or more competitive, and there's less upward pressure on wages for employers to have to raise wages to make this more competitive. What we also see is there's a difference in how these different quintiles, industry quintiles, benefit and respond to these compensation changes. So for example, we see the lowest 20% quintile bounces back in about 10 years. And by 2050, they're actually surpassing what they made previously, and the compensation rate has increased. The second 20% and middle 20% tell a similar story. By 2050, they've gone back to where they were, and it hasn't had in the long term as large of an impact. However, when we're looking at doing a cost-benefit analysis and looking at both the pros and the cons, if you look at the fourth 20% and highest 20%, they still have not bounced back by 2050. And therefore, there's going to have significant impacts on higher income groups. And one of the reasons for this is because if you look at lower income jobs, such as food service and things like that, there's always going to be a strong demand, and these jobs get created more over time. However, in higher earning jobs, it's much more competitive to begin with. So when you increase competition on an already competitive job, there's less of an incentive to raise wages. Now this is the residential investment across regions. As we see an almost immediate increase in investment, and this is again reflecting the DC investment. This drops, however, all across time till 2050, we see that's always going to be above zero when it comes to investment. And furthermore, this investment is going to rise again. This is because after this initial investment, there isn't much more investment necessary. You have the project completed. However, over time, we assume that families are going to be expanding, more people are going to be moving in, and consequently, more investment is going to be necessary. Now we can compare the DC and Maryland residential investment, and this also tells an interesting story about regional inequalities. As you can see, the DC residential investment is quite high, and this continues throughout 2050. This is consistently higher, and it consistently rises. However, Maryland is throughout 2050 is actually negative. And the problem with this is, well, DC is immensely benefiting from this new investment. There's an increase in jobs, there's an increase in GDP, there's less investment taking place in Maryland. So again, when doing a cost-benefit analysis on the benefits of affordable housing, it's also important to look at the impacts on other regions and how they're going to be impacted investment-wise. And now we'll talk about the conclusion. So overall, let's start with the labor force. The labor force tremendously benefits from this Walter redevelopment project. We see the labor force increase by 1,442 people, and total employment is increasing by 2,165 people. This means that not only are there numerous people that are living in this Walter redevelopment, many of which are low-income earners, that are now able to have a job and able to raise their own incomes, because again, many of these jobs that are created are higher income jobs, but there's also a large pull from other areas in DC that bring people into this Walter redevelopment. Furthermore, this is really important because it increases personal income, and that's what we see in our model. We see that personal income rises by $578 billion, and very important, disposable personal income rises by $448 million. And the implication of this is that there's more money that's being spent back into the economy, and this comes from, again, an increased labor force and increased wages. And that has a direct output into the GDP. The GDP benefits increasing by $184 million, and the output increases by $311 million. So overall, we see a net positive impact on labor force, personal income, and output in GDP. And these results reflect the change compared to the baseline forecast and are mainly in the DC region. And now we're returning to our original objective with this case study, which is partially furthering the discussion on affordable housing. So we see that integration with market rate housing is often politicized. For example, there's this concept of NIMBY, or not in my backyard, which is the local objection to infrastructure developments in the area, which might typically be supported if it wasn't in these communities. Affordable housing is typically among the objected developments included in NIMBYism due to notions perhaps of financial strain on the community or increases in crime rates. Another factor that we're kind of thinking of is that our study only measured a small percentage of DC's total population, around 0.7%. Meaning that this model is only a fraction of the outlook on the impacts on the greater DMV area. So we wonder how a larger scale study might differ from ours. For example, with a larger data availability, we might see the largest economic migration being among foreign populations rather than domestic migrants. And that is all. Thank you so much for attending. We will now be open to taking questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Victoria, Abigail, Sean, and Kelly for the great presentation. We're shortly going to be getting into the question portion of this webinar. So if you haven't asked a question yet and you have one, I definitely encourage you to enter it now. If for some reason we're not able to get to your question, we will be sure to reach out to you personally through email. So let's get started. You can go back in the slides if it helps you refresh your memory for some of these questions. The first one being, why do some income quintiles recover from the drop in wages and others do not?
Yeah, I can definitely take this one. So when we look at the different quintiles being impacted differently, we see that certain groups, such as the lowest 20%, the type of jobs that are being taken are jobs that are widely available. And what's significant about this is as the DC population raises, it kind of offsets these different, the drops that are going to happen because these jobs are also very high demand. But there's also a high labor force. However, in the highest 20% and fourth 20%, these jobs are much more competitive previously, which means that when there's an already competitive job and you're having a larger number of applicants, it's going to be much more difficult to put upward pressure on wages.
Awesome. Thank you, Abigail. The next question we received is, I am unclear as to the source of the residents. How much of capacity is absorbed by existing residents and so impacting the substitution effect?
Yeah, so I can take this. So our kind of look at it was kind of a little bit more hypothetical per se. We just kind of assumed that like this new what's it called, group of people that were going to be living there is going to be around 5,000. We kind of assumed like around kind of 2 people would be living in each unit. But we did use economic migration kind of to show this because the base before was kind of abandoned for about 10, 15 years. So we kind of assume that like this would be like a new population of people, a new group of people, like joining the workforce, spending in the economy. But I mean, we didn't really have too much of the demographic data of who lived there, so we couldn't really tell who was a previous DC resident who was moving from like another apartment to a new apartment in the parks. But I guess that's something kind of we can look at another time if we had, I guess, more data availability and other stuff.
Great. Thank you, Sean. The next question we had is kind of an interesting one that would be a good cost benefit analysis, but are the housing units better than alternative uses of the land? An example they give is, couldn't the land also be filled by a company that would hire people and boost labor demand in the area? And then they ask, like, what could the land be used for if not for affordable housing?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of one instance of what they could do with the land. I mean, there is a way that you could look at, if like say you put in a factory there, you could see the impact of like 1,000 factory jobs. But we kind of did it as housing just because it's a real life example. There's probably, you could kind of look at it, like take more of an advanced look at it and see if you add, I guess, factory jobs, if you add like office jobs, if you add something else, it could have more of a benefit, but we just kind of did housing because it was a real life example. But I mean, if you want to take a look at it in a different way, like you could find more of a benefit of having like a factory or an office park there, but it was just kind of a real life example that we decided should look at.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Sean. So those are the questions we've received up to this point. And so for that reason, I'm going to begin my outro. And usually as soon as I do this, we have some people ask questions. But I will say that about an hour after this presentation concludes, we're going to be sending a copy of these slides and recording to your email that you used to register. If you get a closer look at these materials and have any questions at that point, I encourage you to reach out to info@remi.com, and I will be sure to forward your question to the correct people, part of this team. But I again want to thank Victoria, Abigail, Kelly, and Sean for the great presentation. I want to thank everyone who joined today. And yeah, I hope you will join future REMI webinars. Have a good week, everybody.